So just to briefly introduce myself, I'm an educational consultant, teacher mentor. I also do motivational speaking, but for the most part, I teach English at Summit High School. Okay, I put together this presentation for you, and it's a lot that we're going to go through. So I really want to just dive in and get started. So let's begin. Okay, so you know how teachers, we come in and there are those students, we knock on their desk and we say, hey, I'm going to call on you for this question in a few minutes. I'm going to do that for you right now, just to kind of give you a sense and a moment to ponder this. What is the most uncomfortable topic or conversation that you've encountered in the classroom? Okay, take a second and think about that. While you're thinking, let me provide you with the roadmap for today, okay? First, we're gonna state the problem, okay? Why is it so uncomfortable for us to have certain conversations? We're gonna briefly discuss some outcomes. Next, we're going to learn actionable steps, a process that I've called essentially the lifting process. And it's going to help mitigate the problem. Now, I said this strategically, mitigate the problem, because the title is Embrace the Uncomfortable. We have to learn to embrace it. We can't just assume that, oh, now I feel comfortable talking about anything, right? 4, practice these actionable steps. We'll have some time to put them into play. And then hopefully we'll have some time for a Q&A session, all right? There's a lot to get to. Let's dive in. And here, knock, 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 I'm calling on you. What I want you to do right now, in 5 words or less, I want you to share the most uncomfortable topic or conversation that you've had in your classroom. I'm going to give you roughly 30 seconds, and I want you to post those things inside of the chat room, okay? Your 30 seconds begins now. Let's put you on the spot.
I'll read them as they come through.
Perfect.
So, race. Student with SAD asks what autism is. Lack of teacher diversity.
And that's time. Continue.
The connection between racism and religion.
Ooh.
Holocaust.
Ah.
Sexism in Shakespeare.
Ah.
Talk with a student who had a t-shirt with a number of names on it, all friends she knew that had been killed by gang violence.
Oof. Yes, yes, yes. Those are all heavy duty topics, right? That a lot of us will feel very uncomfortable in discussing. Let me share my uncomfortable story with you. So yes, though outside of the classroom, I have encountered issues on, as some of you have brought up, race, my sex, my age. I've also, of course, experienced certain things inside of the classroom, particularly experienced around the things that I've planned, the lessons that I've planned. Just to share a bit with you, I started off at Summit High School roughly 8 years ago. I was about 3 years into teaching, and I was super excited about teaching this unit I developed over James McBride's book, The Color of Water, which is essentially talking about his experiences being biracial, right? Having a white Jewish mother and having a Black father. And I was extremely excited. Just to give you some context, Summit High School is affluent, mostly white, and some would even say somewhat conservative type of town. But nonetheless, I was just like, let's go. We're going to talk about race, right? So I created and we did historical context. We built all these things. And I was like, we're going to start this conversation that we're built up to, and I'm going to lead with my own racial experience. And then it's just going to open up and the students are going to come pouring out their stories and it's going to be amazing. Pause. Do you think it was amazing? Yeah. Besides students probably wanting to jump out the window, we were on a second floor. Goodness, it didn't happen. Yeah, it was awkward, right? Students were sitting there staring at me like, oh goodness, you went through that? Wow. Others felt like turned red. Wow. So we're going to talk about this? Oh boy. It was just awkward, even for me, right? The point is, though I thought I was prepared, I was not, right? And over the years, and kind of talking and discussing, I've had an aha moment, and I've developed a process called the heavy lifting process, essentially, to kind of go over how to effectively plan for these necessary uncomfortable conversations while also reaching your learning objectives. Okay, so for today, we're going to share that process with you. And although it's comprehensive, we're essentially going to go over the outline structure and kind of go over this, in generally. Okay, but hopefully you can walk away with some actionable steps. All right, let's dive into this. The problem. Now, the first problem I would say is a personal problem, right? Let's read this. When faced with any difficult conversation, there are three possible outcomes that teachers are met with, right? The people who want to do the lesson planning and talking about this. You can either say, yes, I'm going to hold this crucial conversation and it will go great, right? You can have a conversation that goes poorly, as I experienced, or you can avoid the conversation entirely. Okay, we already know that that's a no-no, right? There's too many benefits. There are too many amazing things that we can take away by having a conversation. But I'm here to say that if you do have the conversation and it goes poorly, it's okay. Put some neosporin on it, put a band-aid on it. We're going to bounce back. Okay, let's dive into this. Now, the systemic problem, this is when it becomes bigger, or it's macro, right? It's outside of us. I think that through my research, this says it best, right? The mainstream communication classroom has been orchestrated to observe and preserve dominant cultural norms that serve white, male, middle upper class, heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied, and Christian interests. That is, you could look at the holiday schedules of most US colleges and universities, and I would add in K through 12, right? And see that this is a systemic issue. No wonder why it's hard to facilitate these uncomfortable conversations, right? I mean, come on, in this classroom, both the teachers and the students, you have to embrace the charged personal emotions that are attached to the things that you guys brought up, right? The fear of being judged, misunderstood. Now they're going to treat me differently because I seem to be the only conservative voice in the class among the liberals, right? And think about our students, every single one of them, including the teacher, right? There are certain connotations that are attached to words, and students will say things, right? Students will receive them differently. We have to unpack them and think about those different contextual meanings. Conflict and tension can most certainly arise in the classroom when it's handled, right? We have no idea. This is a big one. Throughout the years, you've had those students, and you know who I'm talking about. Those students that are just like blah, 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 right? They'll say anything, no filter whatsoever. You have no idea what they're going to say, right? And of course, factor in unknown norms of communication outside of school. What does that mean? We don't know what communication looks like in their household. We don't know how they effectively communicate, which is why it's important for us to consider these things, right? When we have the conversation. Now, yes, I understand that those may in fact be some of the issues and some of the problems, but it is crucial to have these conversations, right? When they're done right, these are some of the outcomes. Look at this. We're creating analyzers, right? Synthesizers. They become self-reflective practitioners. We create critical thinkers, right? With empathy. Most importantly, right? They'll be able to develop their voices and connect with other students in the classroom so they can become more and more comfortable with discussing uncomfortable things, right? Overall, the mission of every educational institution is to develop productive, civically engaged citizens. And that's what we will do when we implement these strategies in the classroom. Now that we're done kind of talking a little bit about the problem, I want to discuss ways to mitigate this problem. And guess what? Yes, it starts with us as the educators, right? We have to think about how we're going to handle and prepare to have these uncomfortable conversations that will address both the personal and the systemic problems, okay? And this is when, before we dive into the uncomfortable conversation, we have to do the heavy lifting, okay? Now, in breaking this down, I created actionable steps for preparation, okay? The word lifting itself is an acronym, right? Leave, inform, foster, think, intrigue, name, and give are some verbs that we should keep in mind when we are considering, right, going through the lifting process, okay? Here's something I want us to note before we dive further into this. The first 3 steps, okay, of this process involves personal things that you must do before you even touch, think about, or even start to work with the content of the conversation, okay? Let's kind of dive into this a little bit. Oh, here we go. Okay, I know that man looks creepy. All right, I did this intentionally. Okay, blank face. Okay, leave your biases at the door, not your classroom door, the school door. Okay, why? Okay, James Baldwin says it best. The purpose of education, finally, is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions. As educators, right? We give the students the tools and the strategies, right, to use in order to think, right? The biases will tell them what to think, but teachers teach them how to think. Hence, leave your biases at the door. Comes with practice. Next, the I in this process is to inform yourself about student populations in the various perspectives, just to kind of give context, right? Who's in your classroom? What are their interests? Do you know the makeup of your classroom and some of the things that they're involved with, right? If so, brainstorm those, bring them in to your lesson planning. And of course, whatever it is that you're going to talk about, you need to know the various perspectives, right? The different ways of looking at whatever it is that the students may in fact talk about. And of course, this third step, the F, foster a safe environment, okay? I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I did want to give you a little insight onto this just in case. I am coming from an English background, so I don't want to assume. But I think the Socratic seminar setup is a fabulous way of giving you some ideas of what you can do to foster that safe environment, right? The teacher essentially becomes the facilitator, right? You're not telling, being a part of the discussion, you're guiding the students, right? You teach students how to communicate. As we said, we don't know whether the students know how to communicate or not effectively, right? Provide them with the language. Instead of saying disagree or agree, what cues can I use? I agree because, I disagree because, to help push the discussion further. Give them the language, the cues. What did you mean when you stated, right? How can you follow further? Do you have textual support? So on and so forth, right? You want to give them the language. Set your expectations. Are you going to change the classroom physically by creating a circle, right? Are you going to have them track with their eyes? Must they raise their hands, right? Must they always bring some type of textual support? Establish some of the processes, right? And the standards that you will have laid out before the students will even have the discussion. And of course, this is so important, right? I had to tell a lot of teachers this. You have to understand the purpose of the Socratic seminar, right? When Socrates allegedly met with his students, right? He peppered them with questions. The objective was not to come in and debate, right? And try to convince someone else of the other side. The objective was not to come in as a panelist, right? And come in as expert and share your expertise. No, right? The objective essentially was to discuss, right? Whatever the topic was for deeper understanding, right? It was about the journey, not the end destination, right? And we have to keep that in mind. Have the students unpack whatever it is that they're discussing, right? So they can get something rich out of this. They can walk away finding a new voice and a new perspective, all right? Now, let's take a pause. I told you the first 3 steps, leave, inform, and foster of the lifting process, that It lays the foundation needed to have, right, before you even have the conversation. And once established, it does not change and it becomes habitual, right? Leave your biases at the door. You should continue to practice that until it becomes habitual. Informing yourselves about the students as well as the different perspectives, habitual. Leave it, right? It will not change. Foster a safe environment that should become habitual for you and your students. Okay? The second phase of the lifting process. The next phase requires repetitive lifting. Repeat this process with new information, okay? Now we can start planning the content of the conversation and align them with the learning objectives. Let's get into the content of what you're going to discuss. Okay. T, think about a common ground for all students. Okay. Now I know that some of you are sitting here and looking at that Charmin, and you might be feeling some type way right now. I'm not trying to bring up any feelings, right? We were all looking for some toilet paper before, right? No, okay. I want you to look at Charmin, okay, with another approach. Think of it as a business. Because as teachers, I want us to think about how we approach our students. Businesses think about who they market to, right? Their populations. With a business like Charmin, there's no niche or small population they're marketing to. It is literally meant for everyone. Everyone has to go, right? Use Charmin, okay? You want to have that same mindset. What can you discuss? What can you talk about that is relatable and connects to all of your students? For example, if I start off with something like Black Lives Matter, right? Maybe not all of your students are Black in the classroom, or even if they were, they might not feel the same about it, right? Instead, strip it down to what makes it so relatable, right? If you strip it down, you'll focus on identity, right? It's about identity. Go further, then you're talking about a misperceived identity. You strip it down even further, then what are you getting to? Hey, people are maybe treated differently because of how they are misperceived, right? Now, it's not just the Black students in the classroom that connect. Now we're talking to all of our students because they may have all experienced being misperceived or treated differently by that misperception at one point, right? If we move on with this process, the I, intrigue the students with provocative, thought provoking, and interesting questions that stem from the common ground, right? If I was to build off of that, right? We think of these as essential questions. If I was to build off of what I had before with identity, maybe I would follow up with some essential questions that look like this, right? How do you get people to see you for who you really are, right? Why does it really matter how people perceive you and whether they know who you really are, right? Now we're kind of like getting at those students, reaching every single one of them and starting to get them to think about themselves and self-reflect, right? Next, the N, and this is where it all starts to tie together. And this is the part that I love, right? In the lifting process, the N, name the analytical lens you will use. Oh, this is when you begin to channel the conversation, right? Now, all of those emotions and those feelings, right? The fears, they get to direct them towards the analytical lens. Now, let's take a step back. What is an analytical lens? I love this picture. Think of it just like that. You're now putting on a new lens, a new way of seeing your world. And hopefully it allows you to see it differently, right? Which is why the next point, frame and structure the conversation, it gives the teacher now a little control, right? Okay, instead of just talking blankly, I'm going to have apply this lens and now kind of control and frame the conversation a little bit more, right? Teach the skill of critical thinking. Come on. Whenever you have to see differently, you will start to think differently. And of course, provide new perspectives and insights. Not only are they seeing differently, but they're hearing all types of ways of seeing through this same lens as well. Here are some examples of some popular, and of course, these are just a handful different type of analytical lenses you can use. Some of my favorite: Marxist lens, feminist literary lens, psychoanalytical lens, the historical lens. As an English teacher, I have the privilege to go ballistic with all the type of lenses that I can apply to anything that we read. But so do you. No matter what background that you come from, you can absolutely apply them all. Now, lastly, G, give students a choice. Passion led them there, right? The more and more you involve your students, the more and more they see themselves in the lessons, the more and more you get them fired up, right? To talk about and discuss whatever issue is at hand. Now, let's kind of take a second, breathe it all in. That was a lot to process, right? When we start lifting, I think it's important for us to remember T, think of common ground, intrigue students with provocative questions, name the analytical lens that will be applied, and give students a choice. Remember, we're going to focus on the second phase, because the first one, that takes a lot of you to do, right? Before you even dive into the content. Today, I just want to, for the sake of time, to dive into the content, right? Getting into creating whatever it is you need to create to have this uncomfortable conversation. Okay, now this is what we're going to do. We're going to watch The Cave. It's an adaptation of Plato's Republic. I can't remember if it's chapter 16. I should know this, 15. I teach it sometimes. But essentially, we're going to watch this film. It's about 2 minutes and 33 seconds, I want to say. And I want you to put on, become educator. You're the teacher of this classroom. You're going to watch this video thinking about think, intrigue, name, and give, the second part of the lifting process. In other words, brainstorm ideas of what type of conversation you can create by or from this video, okay? And what we're going to do after we watch the video is we're going to be prepared to share these ideas or brainstorm these ideas in a group so that we can share them together, all right? I'll give you further information after the video, all right? But take as many notes as you need. Let's begin.
Imagine prisoners that have spent their entire lives chained deep inside a cave. They have been chained so that they cannot see behind themselves, and they are forced to stare endlessly at the cave wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire is burning, and between the prisoners and the fire is a raised walkway. Now imagine that each day, a menagerie of objects crosses the walkway. Animals, people carrying their wares to market. Their shapes create an intricate shadow play on the wall in front of the prisoners. This is the only world that the prisoners have ever known. Shadows and the echoes of unseen objects. Now, imagine that a prisoner is released. After some time adjusting to the blinding light, the freed prisoner will begin to experience the world outside of the cave for the very first time. And it is like nothing he could have ever imagined. With his new perception of the world, the man will of course want to return to his friends to share his incredible discoveries. But the prisoners cannot recognize their old friend. He appears as all things do. His voice is a distorted echo, and his body is a grotesque shadow. They cannot understand his fantastic stories of the world outside of the cave. To them, it will never exist. This, of course, does not make the world outside of the cave any less real.
Okay. Now, we're going to do a little warm up before we begin lifting, okay? Let's walk through a model. We know how we like to do it with our babies, our students. Let's walk through a quick model to kind of get you guys thinking about how can I kind of look at this, okay? So if I was to think about the second phase of the thinking process, okay? If you think about think, the common ground, okay? We all raised to have biases, right? Certain beliefs and perspectives. That applies to everyone in a classroom, right? Intrigue them with some provocative questions. So if I come out of that common ground, can our household upbringing, cultural beliefs, and biases ultimately end up creating our cave? Whoa, right? If so, what frees us from the cave eventually, right? If not, how does our household upbringing, cultural beliefs, and biases help us to see the world, right? If I was to go to name the analytical lens now that I can apply to look at this, I would apply the cultural lens, right? To see this and to look through this. And of course, I would teach them the cultural lens before they dive into this, right? The last step, give them choice. Okay, what choice can I give them? Hey, when we have the discussion, you'll be able to provide personal, worldly, and textual examples, but I'm not just going to limit it to the text that we covered in this classroom. I want you to be able to pull text that you've read outside of the classroom as well, right? To support your claims. All right. So this is just one example. There are tons of ways and lenses that you can apply to this same thing. And I want you guys to essentially find it. So it's your turn. We're going to go into breakout sessions. And in groups, I want you to brainstorm the second phase, the ting and lifting, right? You have an allotted time of 4 to 5 minutes. I'll check in after the 4th minute, essentially to see if you need a 5th. And then this is the most important part. If you can, and whoever's up for the challenge, I want you to select someone in the group to share the discussion, the major takeaways, your ting, if you will, okay? Just one person. We're gonna unmute you and you're gonna share it out, all right? So we can begin as of, I'm putting the clock, the stopwatch on now, but if our facilitator can put us into groups.
Yeah. So I'm putting you into groups. There'll be 4 to 5 people in a group right now. You do have to click to join.
All right.
So you can just join your groups and then we'll close them in about 4 to 5 minutes. So Dorothy and Keith, you can join a room. You should be able to see a button that you can click on to join the room.
to another room.
Asha, did you say you were leaving?
Yep, I was trying to see if I could.
Can you do? Okay, clearly she can. That's great. All right, I'm going to leave as well. I think you have about 1 more minute.
Okay. So I guess, Amanda, we're just going to stay focused on what you brought up with
So it sounds almost like you're saying for us to take a look at like from the perspective of the prisoner, right? Like how could the one who got free kind of help shape a new perspective for the prisoners?
And if you're teaching conflict in your class, maybe it could be how is the family, focusing on the people who are at home and them possibly rejecting or, challenging what the person who's been free has, perceived or seen, or how they've changed. I think all adolescents would understand that.
Yeah, for sure.
So 1 more minute. I'm going to close the room in 1 minute. It's okay.
Yeah, 1 more minute and then let's close. Yeah. All right, guys. So since I'm in
Do you need me time?
now, there we go. Now you can hear me. Okay.
That I thought I just gave you all permission to mute and unmute, but I am.
It is okay. All right. Do I need to reshare my screen or can we all see it?
No, you need to. I can see. I think you need to reshare.
Gotcha. Let me reshare the screen now. All right. Okay. So let's kind of take a moment and let's share. Okay. One of the groups that I was in, I would like someone for that group. I spent a lot of time just before we kind of dive into this, because I know we're kind of wrapping up on time. Let me say this. A lot of the thinking that goes into this, right? A lot of the brainstorming, this takes time. This is not a sit there in a matter of minutes. This is not a sit there in a matter of days. this conversation should start to happen while the students are learning, after they learn some crucial and key information, so that they can sit down and have the conversation, or whatever is said in your curriculum, right? They have to learn the analytical lens before they can even apply it, right? So this is heavy duty stuff right here. And usually it takes me about 3 hours to kind of go in and train different teachers on this, right? We're just trying to condense this down into an overview. So I want to keep that in mind. But for one group, I definitely heard something impressive because she already had kind of like an intent and a certain lens that she already came into this discussion with. I'm wondering what group I came into. I wasn't able to write down the name, but you know who you are. The first group that I jumped into, if you can have that person share some of the major takeaways.
So you should be able to unmute yourself, but if you're running into trouble, then just raise your hand and I'll unmute you, because I believe I gave you all permission, but I am not 100% sure.
I was able to unmute myself.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want me to tell you the whole background story of it.
Yeah,
or?
you could provide the context and then we'll walk through the second phase. You'll tell me the common ground that you established and then we'll walk through the ING. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So I am a high school teacher with students with ASD and other developmental disabilities. So we're working on a new unit on self-advocacy and self-determination. And essentially the first step is I need to, help these students understand what their classifications are and then go from there, right? So a number of my students may not know that they are classified. A number of them may not know that they have IEPs, and so on and so forth. So it's almost that conversation, that uncomfortable, it may be, conversation I need to have with my students.
So if you were to walk away, your objective is essentially to get the students to not only just walk away understanding the importance of knowing, right, the different learning abilities or disabilities, but essentially to kind of even try to take it further, maybe even on their own, or when you get the parents' permission to understand their own, right?
Yep, so
So
self-advocacy would be my end goal, yep.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so if we walk through, right, what is your team? What is the common ground? You had to think of a common ground for all the students, and that's clearly what for you?
I believe that all of these students have some sort of classification or disability.
Absolutely. Excellent. So that's where we'll reach all the students. Now we're going to build on top of that and start to think of the essential questions that are aligned with your learning objectives. So what essential question or questions did you come up with in regard to connecting to the clip? Mm-hmm.
I guess basically it's what are these disabilities? What are these learning disabilities? So what's autism? What's, a learning disability? Breaking it down that way.
Okay, so to me, if I was to come in and say and help you out with this, right, we will kind of unpack that, right? I would say, okay, maybe a part of your learning objective, if we were to add actionable steps and all those other things of having the students walking away, learning these particular learning disabilities and learning how to self-advocate for self, if I had to take that and create essential questions, right, which are more of the provocative questions, and tie it to the video, what I would do is I would create questions that says something like this. Since you want to, if we were to apply and think about the cave, and of course I'm high school, right? So I don't know the level of your students. If we were to think about apply this cave as the cave of the unknown, right? Remaining in the dark, right? Say that they've already done their research. What are some of the devastating impacts of not knowing of your learning disabilities, right? How can that impact you if you were in that cave, right? You can follow up with another question. What's the way to freedom, right? How can learning, right, these learning abilities, and is stepping outside of the cave, what does that mean, right? And of course, hopefully for you, you'll kind of like grab those students to see that the more you learn, right, the more learning disabilities you learn, it's like stepping out of the cave and becoming free. Now you can understand, this is how I see. I'm no longer in darkness, right? Things don't come, blurry and it's not understandable to me. Now I can see clearly, right? Now that I understand and comprehend a learning disability. And more importantly, now I know I can speak up and advocate for self, right? Now that I understand, right? that is an example of essential questions that connect, right? Even though it's aligned to your learning objectives, it connects to the video that we've had, and it's provocative. It gets the students like wanting to engage with it. Now, if we go to N, the analytical lens that you would apply would of course be the learning disability lens, right? Where they'll learn about the different type of learning abilities, right? And then of course for your G, giving them choice, we can even have the students go out and learn different type of learning abilities, right? And then they can add it in when they have the discussion on a video and they apply all of these things that they've learned, they can discuss it and talk about it, right? This is one example. That takes heavy lifting. She knew and had an objective of essentially what to do. It takes time and it takes practice, but I promise you this way of thinking can definitely help. I want to transition, since we have another minute or two, to questions. I know that it's about 4:50. Can I take a question or two, or, okay. Are there any questions while you guys were going through this and that you might have had in mind? And I can absolutely try my best to answer before we wrap it up.
So you can either just unmute yourself, or if you're more comfortable,
okay.
you can just put it in just put the question in the chat and I'll read it out loud, whatever people feel more comfortable doing.
Okay.
And somebody wanted the link to the video. I don't know, Asha, if you can.
Oh, well, I was informed that Rutgers was going to post this.
Yes, no, but I think, is it the link to the actual video? I think it's the
actual
cave video.
Of course, guys. Can you please put that inside of, I know I shared it with you. Can you please put that inside of the chat room?
Yeah, let me check. You shared it in the last email?
And it's an adaptation. It's an adaptation of Plato's, I think it's book 7 of the Republic. I usually read that with my honors classes. And then I show this video as an adaptation. It's not the exact same thing, but it's a really good one. It's a really good one.
Here we go. So this is the link to the video, okay?
Yes. Any other questions? All right. Well, I will say this until something comes through. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Just so you know, this I cannot emphasize this enough. This is a tedious process. You do not just go through this and then get in the classroom and it's like, all right, I'm ready. No, no, right? This is practice. This is practice. Like, I usually go out and I showed you a quick overview. But generally speaking, when I go out and I do training, and by the way, my information is here. You can contact me, email me if you have any type of questions. You can go to my website and kind of see essentially anything that you want to learn, I will be glad to follow up with. But it takes about 3 hours usually to go through this training. To kind of go really into detail, but I really hope that you guys walk away and especially practice all of the lifting process, especially the first steps, okay? I appreciate you guys. It's been a ball, it's been a blast. And I hope that you can walk away with some actionable steps to bring into your classrooms or into your schools, all right?
So there's one question about, are there any training directly linked to SEL?
Okay, I mean, essentially it's not, I feel as though it's all applicable, right? And essentially it's so broad that you can apply it to different types of settings, right? This lifting process. It's really in how you take it and cater it to fit your needs, right? And what you need to do within your setting. And that's the way it's kind of like built.
Right.
All right. All right, guys, it was a pleasure. All right. I hope you guys have a great day and stay safe and stay well.